Good day, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to today's webcast. This call is being recorded, and I'd like to turn the program now over to Ms. Tracy Cook. Please go ahead.
Thank you so much. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the webcast, Hyper-V Failover Clustering, sponsored by StarWind Software and Veeam Software. I'm Tracy Cook with Virtualization Review, and I'd like to thank you all for joining us today. Before we begin, I'd like to take care of a few housekeeping details. Please feel free to type your questions into the Ask a Question box on the console at any time during the presentation. We'll address as many of your questions as we can during the live event. The entire webcast is being recorded and will be archived for future viewing, and we'll send you an email when the replay is available, and that should be in about 24 to 48 hours. You can access the replay using the same link you used today. And now I'd like to welcome today's featured speaker, Howard Marks, and Howard will be moderating today. So Howard, please take it away.
Thank you, and welcome to Hyper-V Failover Clustering, Virtualizing the Remote Office and Branch Office. And I am your not-so-humble speaker. I've spent 25 plus years in the trenches consulting and building storage and compute systems for mid-sized companies and writing for the trade press. I currently am a blogger, columnist at networkcomputing.com, and the chief scientist at Deep Storage LLC, an independent test lab and analyst firm where we beat storage into submission so that you don't have to. I'm going to be joined today by my steadfast co-presenters, Ryan Post, a systems engineer from Veeam Software, and Max Kolomyetsev, StarWind's Virtual SAN product manager. Remote offices and branch offices have generally been problematical from an IT point of view. Like small businesses, they have limited IT staff on site. They don't really have a data center. They just have a server closet. But unlike a mom-and-pop operation, they still require high levels of availability comparable to that that's offered in the enterprise data center. High availability for an enterprise data center is something that enterprise IT guys know how to do, but scaling that down to just the handful of workloads that run at a sales office or a remote plant is actually a substantial challenge. That challenge is multiplied by the fact that these remote sites have a limited budget, and any time that budget gets stretched, those costs have to get multiplied by the number of sites. If you are an organization that runs 1,500 big box stores across the United States, $100 more in the cost of providing IT in each of those stores becomes thousands of dollars across the enterprise. Start building that system the way traditional corporate IT guys would encourage you to build the system, and it starts to get very expensive altogether. So traditionally, enterprise remote and branch offices were built as miniature versions of the corporate data center. So even though we only had 4 terabytes of data in a moderate size remote office, the corporate IT guys would recommend that that remote office be built as a miniature of the data center. One of my consulting clients was an international bank, and their New York office called me in to review what the folks at headquarters back in Geneva had recommended. And they had recommended a system very much like what you see in the screen here, a pair of multi-$1,000 fiber channel switches. In this case, they were recommending, because it was several years ago, an HP EVA array that was going to take up a whole rack and cost several $100,000s. But even if we move this to the modern day and we talk about a small version of an EMC VNX, the array is $25,000. The fiber channel switches are $10,000. If instead of trying to be a mini-me to the corporate data center, we try and treat the remote office like a traditional small business, then we buy a smaller array, not an EVA or a VNX, but something like an HP MSA or a Dell MD3000. That still adds up to $15,000 for not very good performance because it's all 7,200 RPM high-capacity drives, or over $20,000 just for the array to have any sort of hybrid storage. As a result, we sometimes say, we don't have that kind of money. Instead, we'll run a single controller array, which in reality nowadays is usually a PC server acting as storage. The problem there is we've given up all of our high availability. The controller in that single controller array becomes a single point of failure. If you listen to the messaging that's coming out of organizations like VMware, you'll hear them saying that hyper-convergence is the solution, that by eliminating the disk array, we can both simplify operations and reduce costs. And that's true. However, the corporate hyper-convergence solutions from vendors like Nutanix or VMware's Evo Rail OEM solution, build 3 or 4 servers into a single appliance. They can, in a pinch, probably run on a 1 gigabit per second Ethernet network, but 10 gigabits is strongly recommended by the vendors. And one of these appliances will set you back $150,000. And that appliance will support 100 VMs. But 100 VMs is a very large branch office. In my consulting days, I was frequently dealing, even when working with major corporations, with branch offices that might have 5 to 50 users, and 100 VMs to support 50 users is, well, frankly, ridiculous. So what we really need is to take the idea of hyperconvergence, the merging of the storage platform and the compute platform, taking advantage of the fact that the servers we're using for compute have disk controllers and drive slots. But we need to do it scaled down from that 4-server solution and scaled down from VMware Enterprise Edition to something that fits the budget for a remote office. We need the 2-server solution. 2 servers run storage software, and this software essentially turns the disks, and those disks could be solid state and or spinning disks, into shared storage. And that storage software in the VMware world will typically run as a virtual storage appliance, as a virtual machine within the hypervisor. In the Windows world, where we can take advantage of Hyper-V, we can run that storage software in the root implementation of Windows that is part of the Windows Hyper-V environment that publishes the local storage as shared storage and then replicates the data between the 2 servers and provides a failover mechanism so that when one server goes offline, whether it's because of a failure or for maintenance, all of the workloads and the storage function can run on the other server. If we're running Windows applications, Windows clustering can take care of automatically failing the compute workloads from one server to the other. The storage layer, in this case StarWind, similarly detects that the one of the servers has gone offline and the storage function runs on the other server. The most interesting part of this for users who run Hyper-V is that Hyper-V itself is essentially free, since you have to have Windows licenses for the guests that are running in these virtualization hosts. Windows is already licensed. If you have small numbers of Windows, it could be Enterprise Edition. If you have large numbers of VMs, it's going to be Data Center Edition. But essentially, Hyper-V is included in that licensing, and we don't have to go out and spend money on a hypervisor as a separate purchase. It's important to note that in this type of solution, we're not just talking about dumb storage. We're not talking about simply throwing an HP Smart Array into the server and letting the workloads on that server access those disks. We're talking about a sophisticated storage solution that's comparable to many of the disk arrays on the market today. The two single controller devices replicate data synchronously, so data is always written to disks on both servers before acknowledged to the application, and should something fail, the system will automatically fail over to the remaining server. We can get even higher levels of data protection by, in addition to having two copies because we're replicating, using local RAID on each of those servers to protect that data even further. We can use SSDs in the servers for acceleration, providing caching and or tiering. The better systems like StarWind provide low-impact snapshots so that before updating your SQL server, you can take a snapshot, or you can take hourly snapshots of the SQL server just in case something goes wrong, so you have a place to return to. These systems can also do data reduction, like deduplication and compression. Because they're tightly coupled to your hypervisor, they're easier to use. And we're talking about a few $1,000s, not hundreds of thousands of dollars or $20,000 or $30,000 to provide the same set of functionality as those external arrays. The problem then becomes that we still need to protect the data against more than just the failure of one server. The entire remote office may, for one reason or another, go offline. People start thinking strange things when I say that, but I have had clients have remote offices burned to the ground. I've had clients have burglars break in and steal all of the computers, including the servers, from a remote office. And these events happen frequently enough that we need to protect the data. We need to migrate that data, replicate it across a VPN internet connection to another location. We also need to back up that data to protect it from user issues. By synchronously replicating the data from one server to another, we've protected it against hardware problems. We haven't protected it against the user who accidentally maps the G drive and the K drive to the same share, then goes, oh my God, I have two copies of all of this data. That's wasting a lot of space. I'd better delete one. And trust me, I've seen that particular problem. So in order to protect our data against the users, we back it up to a local disk target. And that could be another deduplicated store provided by the virtual storage appliances as part of this cluster, or it could be something as simple as a USB hard drive. We can then replicate the data across the internet to central IT so that there's one authoritative repository of all of the organization's data. And when e-discovery or other requests come in that require substantial access to the data from across the entire corporation, it's available for that purpose. And we want a backup application that has a VMCentric design that takes advantage of things like changed block tracking that make incremental backups much smaller than in conventional architectures, and rapid recovery from the backup store so that if our Exchange or SQL Server gets corrupted, we don't have to wait the several hours to copy the data back from the backup store to the primary storage. We can spin that server up running from the backup store and be up in minutes instead of hours. To conclude, the bottom line is that traditional and SME storage is expensive, too expensive for a 5, 10, or 30-man remote office. While the concept of hyper-convergence promises substantial savings, enterprise implementations are still enterprise price, and we're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars. So they're really only appropriate for the largest branch offices. Moderate-sized branch offices should look carefully at 2-server solutions using Hyper-V as the virtualization layer. These solutions, through synchronous replication and failover, can provide high availability and high levels of data resilience. They can use SSDs to boost performance. They can provide enterprise data services like Snapshots and the like, all for a small fraction of the cost of either the corporate hyper-converged solution or a corporate or SME storage array. So I've now described the advantages from an architectural point of view of solutions in this category. I'd now like to hand off to Max, who's going to talk about some of the details of StarWind's solution in this category and why that's probably a good idea for you. Max, it's all yours.
Thank you, Howard. Hello, everyone. And indeed, their hyperconvergence is a really good answer to the robo scenarios, because every $100 in one location usually means about $100,000 when you get the total for all of your branches. And before we start the actual discussion on how storage changes the game of deploying cost-effective and resilient robos, I'll give you just a little bit of my background so you know why I'm talking about storage so much, especially today. Currently, I'm the StarWind Virtual SAN product manager. Previously, I spent more than 8 years of QA and technical support at StarWind and got more than 10 years of professional IT experience, specifically in storage. And I also host StarWind webinar series, so that this is not the only place I evangelize software-defined storage or storage virtualization, which is a more unbuzzed term these days. So that's it. So the idea behind StarWind is to use minimum number of servers for creating a resilient hardware configuration and resilient virtualization environment. So that's why we decided that minimum number of servers for the storage would be 0. So we essentially use the existing boxes where you run your applications and you run your hypervisor. In our particular case, it's Hyper-V. So we just turn the local storage into a highly available shared storage pool and present it back to the Hyper-V cluster so it can store the virtual machines on there, and the virtual machines are automatically resilient. Now, using no dedicated servers or no dedicated hardware for the storage dramatically reduces CapEx and OpEx of the solution. Buying 2 servers less is already good. Not buying any servers is excellent in most scenarios. Another thing peculiar to StarWind is the ability to create that hyper-converged environment with just 2 physical servers. So most of the solutions offering hyper-convergence on the market nowadays offer this feature with 3 servers or with 3 servers minimal and 4 servers recommended. This introduces multiple difficulties in deploying these scenarios in ROBOs, because for some companies that may be an overkill from the compute standpoint. For most of the people who are okay with the compute power they get for servers, there is a hidden cost in the configuration which you only see when you start deploying the infrastructure around it, like dedicated 10 gigabit switches. If you're building highly available configuration, that means everything needs to be doubled. So it's two 10 gigabit switches, redundant 10 gigabit cabling, and believe me, that is still expensive. We do see 100 gigabit Ethernet, we do see 40 gigabit Ethernet on the market, but 10 gigabit is still expensive. So there is no ultimate and cheap way to do that. So instead, StarWind just requires two servers which can be connected directly with absolutely no switching. You just have redundant network cards between the servers. It's not mandatory to have them. It's 10 gigabit. Instead, they can just be 1 gigabit or aggregated 1 gigabit. That's completely fine. And of course, it's Hyper-V. It's easy to use. There are much more Windows administrators than there are Linux administrators nowadays in robo locations. And with Windows, it's just software which you install on top of the operating system. And there are no specific SAN skills required to manage it. And of course, we made sure that our software runs on any Hyper-V edition. So we also support server cores and the free Hyper-V server. Now, you may be wondering why we actually decided to go hyper-converged. Why not a JBOD-based solution or anything dedicated? The idea behind StarWind is a native Windows application which converts local storage into shared storage. So there is no need for us to build something proprietary. We can sit right on the application layer, and the closer we get to the applications, the better performance we can guarantee. Since we do not pass any I/O through the network when applications are writing to the local storage, we're much faster. We also do not bottleneck the SSD and RAM caching behind slow Ethernet channel like it is in case of any dedicated SAN, and that allows you to get minimal possible latencies from our configuration. You may say that if you're doing a highly available configuration, you are still passing some I/O through the network, but in reality, it's only the synchronization of the blocks between the servers going through the network, but actually we have it faster as well because we only cache the data before we acknowledge it. So that happens much faster than actually writing something to the disk. Now, all these technologies need to be accompanied by something which makes storage purpose-built. And in our case, that is a VMCentric file system. We call it LSFS, or log structured file system. And the main idea is to increase the spindle storage performance. Getting SSDs in your ROBOs may be a good idea, and I'm all for it, but I'm not sure your budget is big enough to do that. So we tried to eliminate I/O blender effect, which kills any spindle-based storage, and instead just get a pillow between your applications and your storage where we sequentialize all that I/O and just drop the deadly I/O blender effect. This gave us multiple advantages over traditional storage and also introduced some interesting side effects, like we basically resurrected parity RAIDs for write-intensive applications and workloads. You can now use RAID 5 for your primary VM workloads, and StarWind will write to RAID 5 in full blocks, so there is no significant I/O penalty, no stripe rewrites and stuff like that. Also, sequentializing happens in memory, so we actually accelerate I/O by getting the writes into distributed RAM and flash cache before it actually hits the disks. And also there is flash life cycle saving, but this is more tied to the next feature which accompanies the VMCentric storage, which is inline deduplication. The idea behind StarWind's inline deduplication is to get in that pillow of RAM between your applications and your storage and actually lessen the number of IOs, which will go all the way down and make it to the storage. So we basically write more to RAM and write less to disks. And then when we read, we have all the deduplicated data cached in the memory layer or flash layer, so we can actually read more from these layers instead of reading from a RAID 5. And even if we get all the way down to RAID 5, even in this case, RAID 5 is good for reads, even if they're random. Also, inline deduplication, unlike offline deduplication, doesn't do double I/O. So you don't need to plan for offline dedupe moments in your robo environments. Now, Howard mentioned that human factor is really big in DR locations or robo locations or any locations where there is no dedicated IT staff. Things can happen. The most frequent is human factor or just deleting something. So we also have a snapshot system which doesn't really drop the snapshots on the same storage you have on your primary system. Instead, it offloads the snapshots to a completely different server with cheaper storage, and you can have your primary systems use the fast storage and then get your cold data off it completely and save a lot of space on the primary systems. And finally, if burglars get in, if something bad happens, you always have a backup, and you need to do it on the per virtual machine level. But if you want to have a backup on the LUN level, on the storage level, StarWind also does that. StarWind offers replication between your primary site and your disaster recovery site. It works with any WAN connection. It doesn't require any dedicated physical hardware. StarWind can run as a virtual machine on your disaster recovery site. So it can be a Hyper-V virtual machine or just an application running on your Hyper-V server or a VM in a cloud. So that's absolutely not a problem. So Ryan will probably tell us more about how to restore effectively and how to back up with minimum effect on the production system. And that's obviously done with the help of Veeam software. Ryan, it's all yours.
Yes, thank you, Max. Yeah, so just a quick intro about myself. I've been here at Veeam a few years now, over 7 years of IT experience, typically focusing with virtualization and backups. Breadth of that coming here at Veeam and expanding my knowledge, so it's been an exciting ride. But to jump on in with data protection. Right, Howard, mentioned a lot of disasters. Some of his customers that he was consulting with, their office is burned down, or thieves come in. A lot of things can happen, and when you don't have the data protected, you may get into a little bit of a hole. Lost money, revenue, all that is part of that. Now, what Veeam has to offer is an agentless backup solution. Right. So there's nothing you're actually having to purchase, deploy, manage on your virtual machines in order to back up or replicate them. Right. If you start looking at remote offices and however many virtual machines there may be, some solutions out there, have special agents for this, another special agent for that, or if you want this type of restore, well, here's another agent. Well, those agents do increase that cost. Right. So at Veeam, we actually do an image level backup, leveraging the APIs available to us from Hyper-V to take snapshots. We're going to grab the guest OS, the virtual hardware, all the objects associated with those VMs wrapped up at that image level, right? So everything, right? So it does lead us to a lot of restore capabilities. But with that file that you get of a virtual machine being backed up, it is going to be deduped and compressed, right? So we're going to help you save on disk space based on where the backups are going to go to, but really, giving you the ability to reduce that footprint and potentially have more backups, right? And as mentioned, any type of disk storage. So it could be a NAS device, it could be a dedupe appliance, it could be a physical server with local or direct attached storage, right? So a lot of different levels of storage you can go with based on your needs, and really everybody's different. I see a wide range, everything from USB hard drives, up to a SAN device, right? 50,000+. Obviously, probably not suitable for that remote office. Right? And then, from Veeam backup or replication, we do have restores, right? Full VM recovery. So the ability to take a virtual machine, fully rehydrate it, back to your production storage, and you're ready to go. Right? We also could go in and grab VM files. So we can grab a VMDK file. We can grab or VHD. My apologies there. VHD, the bins, XMLs, all the other little files that make up a Hyper-V virtual machine. But even going into the file level, we can take a VHD directly from our backup and explore it. So we can go grab those documents, spreadsheets, folders, whatever users may have accidentally deleted, you're able to go in and do. And then we also have some Veeam Explorers. We have restore capabilities for Active Directory, Exchange, SQL, SharePoint, getting down at a granular level. Be able to take items out and export them so you can put them back into the production environment. Now, the great thing about this is that everything I've talked about here is part of our free Veeam backup. Right? I did say that it is free. So, again, lowering that cost to protect your data. You are going to get the full backups every time. So there are some trade-offs, right, when you start looking at our free edition and obviously looking into our licensed versions of Veeam. So with the licensed version of Veeam, it's going to be a lot more scalable. So this comes down to a decision factor of whether you would like to have more manual processes at that remote office or maybe some more automated processes. With the free edition of Veeam Backup, it's a manual backup of one virtual machine at a time, and it's going to be a full backup. So that could be beneficial for maybe one or two Hyper-V VMs that may be there, or if there's a few more. Maybe you have a dedicated team that could do that before they step out of the office for the day. Or maybe it's just a once-a-week type backup you're looking to achieve. So with the licensed version, we get the automated process of scheduling, right? The ability here now to set a schedule to have your nightly backups, have the ability to run as often as you like. If you need to get more frequent, down to hourly or even a continuous backup, that's something the licensed edition of Veeam is going to bring to you, whether it be the standard Enterprise or Enterprise Plus. Now, also with the automation of the process, one thing Howard mentioned earlier as well is tools like change block tracking. We've implemented our own engine into Hyper-V, so we can leverage and figure out those changes that have actually happened, so we can create incremental backups, have a faster job run, so we're not spending the entire length of our job seeing what has changed from the previous job run. But we also take the restores that I mentioned in the slide before, and we enhance them. Right, we enhance them to specifically the Explorers. Right, we have the ability to go into Exchange, go all the way down to a certain email, and then we can take that email and restore it directly back to the production database. Right? Same thing for SQL, Active Directory, SharePoint. Now, we also have about 25 other features as well. Probably one of my favorite features is instant VM recovery. Right, time is money. So when you have a virtual machine that's down, you go to do a restore. I talked about the fully hydrated restore that you would have with the free backup product. So that would take a while, depending on the type of disk it's sitting on, and the other processes that may happen within the infrastructure. But with instant VM recovery, we're going to take that backup and we're going to run it directly from the deduped compressed state from the backup storage. So think about that. A quick restore. Let's get things up and running within the process. So we also have here in the paid edition of Veeam, and actually every license version, Standard, Enterprise, Enterprise Plus, Replication, as the name implies. And this is our ability to take a virtual machine and replicate it from a host in your production or in your remote office and send it back to your center office. I see a lot of this day in, day out of this is what customers are wanting. So if they did lose their remote office, they could at least spin up those virtual machines in their main data center and run from there, make certain network connections for that to happen. But with our replication process, we do include ReIP functionality, as you see here, at 10.xxx to a 192.xxx IP scheme. But we also can fail the data back. Once you have the remote office infrastructure back up and running, take the change data from the DR side, fail it back, updates the actual production VMs at that remote office, and you're back running as normal. So it does provide better restore capabilities during a disaster with replication, versus the decompressed backups. Now, some other top license features that we have. We have a technology called Sure Backup, right? And that's going to be especially the case with Server 2012 Hyper-V, whether it's 2012 or 2012 R2. But this is our ability to take our backups, run them just like Instant VM Recovery in a decompressed state, but in a virtual lab. Test them, make sure that they work. You have the recoverability that you're looking to achieve. Now, a lot of times, remote offices don't necessarily need full replicas at that main data center, but you'd at least like to get their backups off-site. So having some local backups for a potential restore, maybe a couple days, a week's worth, but we can take those backups and run a backup copy job to your main data center to another backup repository, completely independent on the type of disks that you're using. So you can definitely take advantage of that as well for off-site backups. We also have here advanced SQL backups as well, starting with our Enterprise Edition. We actually can go in and have some log backups taken periodically throughout the day. So there are a lot of remote offices that I come across with customers that one or two of their virtual machines is a SQL server that's used heavily at that office. So given this ability to back up the logs means you don't have to have a dedicated, say, SQL admin for that site. You could go and do some of the basic resource down to a certain transaction all through the Veeam console. And then we also have the ability to integrate with some storage capabilities, to leverage VSS hardware providers. So when you have these installed on your hosts, we can see that is the proper VSS snapshot that we need to take. So depending on the vendor, and I'm assuming, Max, you probably have, from the StarWind side, a VSS provider when looking at Hyper-V that we would call on. So take advantage of that with that process. Now, there's some other things, at Veeam to mention that we have to offer. The three editions I've kind of mentioned here already, Standard, Enterprise, Enterprise Plus. But we also have some Essentials packaging. And a lot of situations are going to be different. Our Essentials packaging is targeted at these smaller organizations. Really anything that's going to be 3 hosts or less, so meaning up to 6 sockets. So it really depends on the situation, and I'm not the licensing expert and the one you would really need to be talking to for these details. But if you have plenty of remote offices, we do have some special pricing that can be done. Again, every situation is different depending if you fall into that category or not. So it really helps with the effective pricing to really get your remote offices protected. But we also provide monitoring reporting tools, looking at all sorts of pieces of the infrastructure, the clusters, the VMs, the disks that they're residing on, all the different metrics in between. So really finding issues before they happen. We have over 150 alerts that can be processed to give you an update of what's happening. And packaged together with backup and replication, this does make what we call the Veeam Availability Suite, or the Essentials package above, which is the same product with the 6-socket limit. From our licensing perspective, you can do subscription or perpetual. So again, figuring out those costs, what's going to be better for the long run to buy something perpetual, that way you own it, but maybe you can't get that fully implemented, or you don't know if that office is potentially going to be there next year. Subscription-based model may be more beneficial. But the biggest thing is we do have a 30-day trial. Right? With that, fully functional, put it in your infrastructure, test it out, run it. It really helps you decide whether it's going to be a good fit or not. And through that process, there's engineers such as myself, the team that I'm part of, that will help you out, fix their issues, get you in contact with the correct salespeople for some pricing. But again, trial it out. Everything, all the features I mentioned you can do, especially the free edition as well. You can always download that and play around with it. But really, that's the last of the Veeam component here. And again, protecting your environment, making sure that you have that data backed up. That way, if you had a disaster or had an issue, you can do your resource. I believe that we'll pass it back.
Thank you, Ryan. And so to conclude, dual node Hyper-V based server SANs are the right fit for the remote office branch office. They provide the reliability and scalability that remote offices from 2 to 2,000 users need, while still being affordable for a solution that needs to be replicated hundreds or possibly thousands of times. When building that kind of solution, StarWind is a good choice for providing the storage layer, and Veeam provides affordable data protection for those occasions when things go wrong, which unfortunately happens way too often. So at this point, my erstwhile co-hosts and I will begin answering your questions. And the first question, Ryan, is for you. Is it possible to restore individual files from a backup using Veeam Backup and Recovery?
It definitely is possible, and it's going to be through our free edition and also the paid edition, obviously. What we actually do, from a file level perspective is, for a Windows machine, we create an NFS share directly to our backup file, and we can explore essentially the virtual machine hard disk at that point. No additional space requirements to mount that. We do it all directly from the deduped and compressed backup. For other OSs, such as Linux, we do create just a little virtual machine, really to help us mount the file system too from our backup. Again, not need any space requirements on your volumes within Hyper-V, but we can still go in there and grab individual files.
Terrific. So, Max, I love the idea of a two-server configuration, but some organizations have remote offices that grow beyond the capacity of 2 hosts. How do I scale the the storage layer, to accommodate a 3rd or 4th host?
So with StarWind, there are multiple ways of scaling you can do. You can definitely add one more host and expand your storage mirroring between the servers. So basically, don't mirror between the 2, but you now mirror between the 3. And you add more capacity and you add more compute resources. Same happens if you scale with the 4th server, 5th server, and all the way beyond 64 servers. 64 is the actual limit for the Hyper-V cluster. But that's, I guess, not a robo anymore.
That would be a sizable remote office.
Yeah. And you can also scale up, so you don't necessarily need to add additional server. You can add more storage to the existing servers. If they're small, you can add JBODs to them, and StarWind will replicate those JBODs as well and add them to the common pool of storage for the virtual machines. So that would be scaling up. If you have lots of backups or lots of media information you need to mirror, there is no need to purchase a multi-unit server to fit in all those drives.
Very good. Ryan, I like Hyper-V, but the cost is frequently in SCC VM, whatever the hell, the System Center Virtual Machine Manager. Do I need SCC MVM with Veeam, or can I just run out of Hyper-V Manager that comes with Windows?
That's correct. I mean, you can use the virtual machine manager. Comes with the install windows when you make the Hyper-V role enabled. But from a Veeam perspective, the way we add in architecture could be one of three ways. One being System Center Virtual Machine Manager. That would encapsulate maybe if you had a central office that, maybe that SCVM did contain a remote office. Well, you definitely add it there for Hyper-V. We can add in a Hyper-V cluster, and we can also add in just an individual Hyper-V host. So we got you covered on 3 different levels depending on what you have at that remote office.
Okay. Max, one of our attendees is a little confused about capacity-based pricing. If they buy a 2 terabyte subscription and then replicate that data between 2 servers, is that 1 terabyte of data replicated to make 2 terabytes of data, or are you only counting the source?
We're only counting the effective capacity. So you create a 2 terabyte device. It is effectively using 4 terabytes, so 2 on each node, and we charge you only by the effective one.
Okay, very good. So in the Hyper-V environment, does StarWind run as a VM, or is it in the base configuration?
StarWind is installed inside the Windows Server operating system, so it actually runs along with Hyper-V. You don't need to virtualize it. It's a Windows-level application, so it can get closer to the resources and doesn't need to get that virtual machine overhead.
Very good. So, so Ryan, virtualization is a wonderful thing, but there are times when we simply can't virtualize a machine, and sometimes this is the server that controls some piece of equipment on the plant floor. Can I use Veeam to back up those physical servers as well?
Well, when it comes to physical and talking directly about Veeam backup and replication, no. We are backing up just virtual machines, focusing on the virtual machine itself, again, doing the image level backup. However, anybody that has visited the Veeam website in the past couple months has probably seen something called Veeam Endpoint Protection. It is a tool that's in beta right now. It is designed for laptops and desktops, but it is designed to work with server OS of Windows. I don't see many laptops and desktops running that, so you can kind of take that with your salt. But it can definitely back up a server OS. It's going to be great for any of the one-offs that there may be. It isn't, say, an enterprise-ready solution. And when I mean enterprise, meaning there's not a central location to actually manage, the Veeam endpoint protection. You would be installing on each individual machine. But the great thing about it is that when it is released, and that's targeted here towards the end of Q1, that it's going to be a free tool. So definitely, think about taking advantage of that, testing that, especially when it is released.
All right, and the last question in our stack is for Max. Max, can you talk for a minute about data protection in this environment? Do you want to run RAID 10 on the hosts and then replicate? Do you want to run RAID 5? What are the advantages and disadvantages? Or should I just be brave and rely on the replication as my sole data protection model?
So I would say there are many ways to skin a cat. So depending on the applications, depending on file system you use, and of course depending on the IOPS you want to get from the configuration, you can go with any particular RAID 10, RAID 5, or even RAID 0. And that is always dictated by the number of hosts you have, and it is dictated by the performance you'd like to get. So IOPS is our main characteristics here. So if we focus down to the 2-node robo scenario, if we do not want deduplication and do not want the log-structured file system, we simply want StarWind to replicate storage between the servers, then it is a RAID 10 for optimum performance, or it would be RAID 5 if your applications are not write intensive. Otherwise, if it's log-structured file systems, then it is RAID 5, comprised either of SATA drives or SAS drives, and RAID 5 on both sides mirrored and turned into StarWind LSFS. That would be the most basic explanation, because usually that's where we are getting in the architecturing field, and that can be tricky and lengthy.
Right. But in general, the log-structured file layout hides the small random write penalty that parity RAID like RAID 5 presents, right?
Indeed, indeed. And that comes with 2 servers. With 3 servers, you can get even more disk efficient and use 3 RAID zeros and replicate between 3 RAID zeros and also do the log structuring on top.
Right. Very good. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for attending our webinar today. I, Max, and Ryan are very grateful that you've given us your attention. Hopefully this has been an education for you, and hopefully you will be looking into the 2-server solution for remote offices with Veeam and StarWind solutions. Once again, thank you very much, and this brings us to the end of our presentation.
Thank you, Howard. Thank you so much for your presentation today and moderating the event. And I'd also like to thank Max and Ryan. Everybody did a wonderful job. Really appreciate it. And we appreciate you guys taking the time to share all of this useful information that you did today. And I'd also like to thank the audience for attending. The webcast was sponsored by StarWind Software and Veeam Software and presented by Virtualization Review. So thanks again, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day.